In August 7th of 2015, Fantastic Four, or Fan 4-Stick, came out to theaters to massive negative critical reception, grossing only barely past its reported budget of $120 to $155 million budget, going down as one of the worst superhero movie disasters ever to happen, all the way from its announcement, its messy productions, to the trailers, to that infamous tweet, to now the final film. Even though many would want to forget this disaster, I want to truly examine what happened with this movie and why it turned out the way it did. And honestly, I think this whole film and story with it is extremely fascinating. It's such a truly bizarre film to be made, and also just to be released under such extreme circumstances. It's not even really a movie, it's like an aftermath of something. So in this video I want to review this film, its messy production and all the drama that came with it, and everything that was leading up to the film. This includes the director's backstory and also all of the previous Fantastic Four films leading up to this one. So without further ado, let's recite a line from our older abusive brother who we've had trauma with, and let's...
Hey, clobbering time.
Now, I would assume most people watching this video would already know who the Fantastic Four is, but I still want to recap. The Fantastic Four were developed by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, with the first issue being released in 1961 as actually sort of a gamble for Lee. And his gamble would pay off though, with the comic being successful and eventually kickstarting the entire Marvel Universe as we know it. The team members of the Fantastic Four usually consist of Mr. Fantastic, aka Reed Richards, who can basically stretch any part of his body, the Invisible Woman, or aka Sue Storm, who can basically just make herself invisible but also can do cool things like force fields and force attacks. The Human Torch, aka Johnny Storm, who can basically fly and turn himself completely into fire. And finally the Thing, aka Ben Grimm, who is basically a giant rock monster who has incredible strength. All of these members make up Marvel's first family, and soon they would catch the attention of movie studios for adaptation. In the 1980s, German producer Berg Eichinger, if I said that right, met with Stan Lee, and with Eichinger's production company, bought the rights for the Fantastic Four to adapt it into a feature film, but with a time limit. Eichinger tried various studios to take the movie, but most passed. So in a bid to not lose the rights to make the infamous 1994 Fantastic Four with Roger Corman producing it, the film would only be designed as a rights retainer and literally nothing more, with Avi Arad from Marvel buying the negatives and reportedly destroying every copy of it, which obviously didn't work. Overall, from what I remember, it seemed like a pretty cheesy movie, but also pretty decent as well. Maybe I'll go in depth in more of a future video. Now with the rights secured, Eichinger pitched to other studios, and eventually Fox showed interest in the property and took on Fantastic Four, which will eventually lead to the 2005 film Fantastic Four. Released in 2005 by Fox and directed by Tim Story and on a budget of $100 million, also being the first officially released Fantastic Four film, the film made a pretty decent profit of $333 million. And at the time, even though it was critically panned, personally I think it's actually a pretty good movie. Not great by all means, and also suffers from many issues like weak motivations and not great writing, but still the film is pretty faithful to the comic books and also incorporates some cool stuff as well. So yeah, it's an overall pretty solid and underrated film, and maybe one day I'll go into it a little bit more depth, maybe in a future video probably. I mainly wanted to mention this film as well as a part of the history of the Fantastic Four, but also because this film is so drastically different from what we would see in the much more different Fantastic Four film later on. The film, like mentioned, was a success, and actually Fox's gamble to try to make another X-Men-like superhero franchise actually paid off and could have possibly been the next big thing. Fox immediately greenlit a sequel with 2007's Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer being released. The film in my opinion was pretty decent, but it had more issues than the first one. Like, bruh, they turned Galactus into a cloud. Like, what? Financially as well, it did not perform as well as the first one, and eventually the plans for the third film were scrapped. Eventually the property would remain dormant for a few years, with Fox continuing to make X-Men films, but not knowing what they would have wanted to do with Fantastic Four. Eventually events outside of Fox's control would force them to make a decision, and eventually released in 2008, Iron Man was released by the newly founded Marvel Studios and was a massive success. And soon after, plans were announced for Phase 1 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which at the time was an unfounded concept and at the time was with a lot of risk. Fox in response would make an announcement that they would reboot the Fantastic Four in 2009. In my opinion, kind of as a subtle way of saying to Marvel,
Fight You ain't gonna get these back!
Akiva Goldsman was attached as producer to it briefly, with Michael Green writing a screenplay for the film. But not much as that in terms of progress was actually made on the reboot, as Fox really didn't have a huge interest in making the reboot anyway, at least right away, as it was simply to them a rights retainer, just like the 2005 film. Soon, Phase 1 of the MCU would start eventually, culminating into the Avengers in 2012. The film was so massive that it shook the film landscape at the time, not only proving that superheroes are now the hottest new thing, but also a shared universe of characters was extremely profitable. After this, every studio, and I mean every studio, wanted a piece of the pie, with Sony soon making plans to make a cinematic universe for their amazing Spider-Man franchise, and DC quickly turning their Superman film, Man of Steel, which originally was nothing more than just a plan to reboot, into a full cinematic universe. And soon Fox would soon be finding ways to do the same with their X-Men films and other properties. It was also realized that Marvel IPs and rights were also very valuable to studios, as superheroes were all the rage in Hollywood, and Marvel was turning every character into a massive success. Many fans online wanted all the Marvel characters to be a part of the MCU, but many of the studios wanted to keep the rights to make more money for themselves, and this goes for Fox as well. Even around this time in 2011, Fox held the rights to Daredevil, and its deal with Marvel was about to expire. Marvel at the time offered an extension to their deal in exchange for some characters from the Fantastic Four, like Galactus and Silver Surfer, but even this, Fox would not budge. And as we all know, Daredevil will eventually go back to Marvel, and eventually they produced that pretty great show on Netflix. I mean, have you seen that one take shot in season 1? Like, man.
Nice.
Fox, I'm sure, felt pretty embarrassed by the whole situation, and they wanted to make sure that no other rights would eventually have the same fate, and this included the Fantastic Four. Fox still hadn't made much progress into their reboot at the time, but soon would find their golden boy to direct their film in the name of Josh Trank. To understand the story of Fanforstic, we obviously must understand its director, Josh Trank. Born in February 19th of 1984, growing up surrounded by a studio system in Los Angeles. He grew up admiring the landmarks and getting films at a young age by his father, who already had roots in the film industry. A young Josh wanted to become a filmmaker, and in his mind he wanted to be the next Steven Spielberg, but even a better version of him. But everything wasn't perfect. His parents got divorced at a young age, and soon his father remarried a woman who was even closer to the industry. Sadly though, his new mother would pass away, hurting Trank even more. Also growing up, Trank was also teased for having man boobs, was actually a result of a condition he had. And generally attending school in Beverly Hills gave Trank a massive chip on his shoulder, at least according to the Polygon article about him. An example of this is told by Trank himself. When you're at a friend's house and they have like every fucking Air Jordan, it shocks you. You feel like a loser. Still, eventually Trank, now with a grudge and a driving ambition, and with connections to other filmmakers that actually what other filmmakers would die for, would eventually do small menial work, like first being a director's assistant and directing web shorts. His first viral success actually came in 2007 with a goofy video uploaded in the early days of YouTube, a video called Stabbing Alea's 22nd Birthday. A pretty strange, goofy found footage video of a party gone horribly wrong, with lightsabers and someone dying. Eventually at the end of the video, stormtroopers show up and stop the chaos and arrest the man responsible for the person's death. This small video, believe it or not, blew up massively on YouTube and gave Trank a boost to get started in the industry. Right now, a video actually sits over 1 million views, surprisingly, and I generally personally think the video is pretty funny in general. Also, the kind of found footage style would weirdly strangely influence the next stage of Trank's career also. After this, he directed episodes in a web series called Kill Point, which were uncredited, but he gained valuable knowledge and helped out with his mentor Robert Siegel on his directorial debut, The Big Fan, in 2009. Eventually, with all these credits building up, Trank wanted to make a feature film and was developing an idea he came up with in high school. Teaming up with his inspiring writer and friend Jeremy Slater, worked on developing his idea into a fully feature fleshed out concept. Slater had to leave the project to other commitments, and that's when Max Landis came into the picture after messaging him on Facebook. The two met, struck it off, and eventually Landis developed his idea into a fully realized script. Multiple studios were interested in making the script, but Fox eventually gave Trank the chance to actually direct it. But before Tom Rothman could actually greenlight the project, who at the time was the head of Fox, wisely requested a proof test of concept short film before greenlighting the feature film. Sort of like saying to Trank if he can actually talk the talk, but could he actually walk the walk? Eventually, the proof of concept impressed Rossman and greenlit the film, and eventually this would become Josh Trank's directorial debut, Chronicle, released in February of 2012. This film is a found-footage superhero film focusing on 3 teenagers that get their superpowers from discovering a magical crystal. After this, the teens explore their new powers, but things soon become very serious, and by the end of the film, the main character dies, making the film kind of a tragedy of sorts. The film was released to massive positive reception, and also made over $100 million on a very small budget of $15 million. Personally, I think the film is fantastic. It showcased many elements that would eventually feature in the later Fan 4-Stick movie. Featured a main character with a huge chip on his shoulder like Trank, and also making a movie that is not like other superhero films. Also making more of a character study of a person's downfall, a deconstruction of sorts. Breaking down things basically, and making things uncomfortable. Keep note of that, by the way, because Trank loves making things uncomfortable. Like I said, I think the film is pretty great, displaying an interesting main character that experiences things that most people who have been abused feel. And also all the other characters reacting to specific situations is overall pretty interesting, and I think it's a great film. Like I already mentioned, the film was a smash hit, and Trank had accomplished his dream. By the age of 27, he made the highest grossing film by the first-time director, beating Spielberg by a year. But weirdly, instead of enjoying the massive success he was actually getting from all this, Trank felt angry. As the Polygon article described it, all I felt was anger towards things. Anger towards kids that I grew up with. I didn't feel any happiness from that. I didn't know how to embrace happiness. But I had to have meetings with Margot Robbie and Emma Stone and Amber Heard. To me personally, I think that these are deep psychological issues, and I think that Trank probably should have gotten professional help for. Even Trank admitted that he punched his hand into a wall and cracked his hand on a steel beam in an attempt to deal with all this anger that he had built up. Usually never really going well for anyone in the process, including the hand. Regardless though, Trank pushed his feelings aside, and as his massive success came with a massive offers. Trank was the golden boy of the town. He was receiving offers left and right from studios for a lot of projects. One from Warner Brothers for Red Star, and also another for Shadow of the Colossus. He described a pitch that he created with the writer as, quote, one of the most awkward and squirmiest pitches I've ever seen before. He was offered the opportunity to also the pitch for Venom as well by Amy Pascal, despite the grievances of the already producers, including Avi Arad and Matt Tomek on the film as well. His take on Venom was inspired by The Mask allegedly, and it was also going to have a hard R rating, but it was rejected by the producers of Venom and eventually fell through. Eventually though, talks around the Fantastic Four began to gather steam, and Fox wanted to make a more grounded take on the Four anyway, and eventually offered the project to a young Josh Trank. So like the Polygon article says, carrying the mental baggage and anger from Chronicle and also the promise of creative control from Fox, accepted the offer. Not because he was a fan of the comics or anything, but it was for him the most rebellious thing he could do, and soon moved into the pre-production of Fantastic Four. As an analogy kind of described it, slowly going into hell.
Dr. Doom over here.
Redo something, please!
The whole drama and story of this hellish production was anything but fantastic. Now just a disclaimer, I'm mostly gathering this info from videos, articles, and trailers, as we don't know the official timeline of events due to many people involved having signed NDAs. So with that being said, let's finally get into it. Josh Trank got his old friend Jeremy Slater to start making a script for the movie, and Fox just said, sure. Once again, just to remember, the Foxes was nothing more than just a rights retainer, so they didn't really care who was actually writing the movie. Trank came in with the idea that the sequel to his movie would be fun and exciting, but the first movie, according to Trank, the first movie was all going to be basically the filmatic version of how I saw myself all the time. The metaphor of these characters crawling out of hell. Yikes. Slater, being a comic book fan, was ready to turn classic comic book moments into giant CGI set pieces. While Trank was the opposite, with his only expertise despite previous claims was actually only watching a few episodes of the 90s cartoon of the Fantastic Four. Slater tried his best to engage with Trank, giving him classic stories of the Fantastic Four and their villains, but Trank was still not engaged. According to Slater himself, it didn't matter if they were fighting robots in Latveria, or aliens in the negative zone, or mole monsters in downtown Manhattan. Josh just did not give a shit. Trank was more interested in Reed's arc, and he did mention that he understood Mole Man, because he felt like he was was undermined by the system, which I guess he understood that point as well. He was basically trying to figure out what the Inception version of Fantastic Four was, and more importantly, what was the David Cronenberg version of Fantastic Four. Eventually, after 18 drafts, only 2 gained to the studio due to Trank being the gateway for Slater to Fox. Slater left the project after 6 months, failing to make a script that both parties were truly happy with. Slater's version of Fantastic Four featured more exciting elements from the comics, with notable differences of Galactus being in the script and also Dr. Doom being one of Galactus's empresses, so to speak, like the Silver Surfer. Also, as you can see in this concept art, there's also this weirdly cool abandoned city that you would have seen in the Negative Zone or Planet Zero, but was cut from the film. Maybe one day I'll go into this version a little bit more in its own separate video. Regardless though, Fox needed to make a movie soon, and soon the script was already made and was polished up by a few Fox-approved screenwriters to get into shootable shape. Simon Kinberg, who at the time helped Bryan Singer guide the X-Men franchise and was also behind some of the best X-Men movies, X-Men Dark Phoenix a few years later. Trank brought Kinberg into the film as a co-writer and producer for the film, but as principal photography and the start of production loomed, the pace of the production itself was moving in a less than stellar fashion, to say the least, with reportedly the planned script not even having a third act. Also, Fox slashed the budget agreed by Trank in the studio by reportedly $20 to $25 million, which resulted in cutting out a lot of the planned action sequences, and also the original spectacular third act that was originally planned. As one source close to the production going in said, the only 2 weapons a movie has are its script and its director. And this had neither. Production was starting to ramp up, and casting was starting to happen. Trank announced his take on the Four as a dark and gritty take on the Fantastic Four, inspired by David Cronenberg body horror. This drew many puzzled or if not horrified faces from the fans online. And soon Trank would announce his cast for the Fantastic Four. Trank pushed for Michael B. Jordan to be the Human Torch, which drew much criticism from online fans, with many racist trolls coming out in droves online, criticizing the film and its director in every turn that they possibly could. Miles Teller was heavily pushed by Trank for the role of Reed Richards, despite later on the two nearly coming to blows during the shoot of the film. Reportedly in retaliation, Fox would not accept a black Invisible Woman and forced Trank to cast Kate Mara as the Invisible Woman, which he reportedly was not happy by. Even Kate Mara would eventually go on later to say that she was even told by Trank not to read any of the comics because the film would not be based by any of them, which obviously drew much more criticism online. It was also rumored that Trank was kind of abusive to her during the shoot of the film, but this is only rumors and speculation with that. The whole reaction with the whole Michael B. Jordan situation and other factors did not help Trank's mental health, by the reaction online forcing Trank to sleep with a .38 by his bed during the initial shoot, as it really got that bad. Other casting choices including Jamie Bell that was cast as The Thing, and also Toby Kebbell was cast as Dr. Doom, or excuse me, Victor Domashev. Instead of the famous Latvian dictator, he's now a programmer and a hacker who goes by Doom on blogging sites. This once again did not help the reaction by the fans online, even creating a more negative picture of this film by fans. As the start of production crept closer, Trank was slowly being overtaken by producers and other parties involved. The particular examples like how Trank clashed with previs artists over the style of the action sequences for the movie. Even before the shoot, according to the article by Bleeding Cool, Fox was seriously considering dropping Trank's cast and the director in question, but luckily, I guess for us, none of that happened. After this, Fox also announced that a Fantastic Four 2 for 2017 was announced, an attempt to show confidence in their film despite all the rumors going around online. Soon in May of 2014, filming began in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and over the 70-day shoot, many rumors started to appear online by the madness unfolding. Trank, according to the Polygon article, apparently recalled no complaint from the studio during the shoot, but Trank likened his eventual onset experience with Fox then president Emma Watts to reports out of the demilitarized zone in the Korea Peninsula. Yikes. There were never bad news per se, but the general feeling was that war could erupt at any moment. Many rumors from the internet also started to appear as well. Rumors that Teller and Trank not getting along at all, and once again nearly coming to a full-on fist fight. And like I mentioned earlier, even allegedly putting Kate Mara to tears at one point by Trank during the shoot. Rumors also suggested that Trank was very unprofessional on the shoot, with one post that said, Trank showed up to set late or so high that he couldn't speak almost every day, writes one widely circulated comment on the LSU fan message board during that time. There was also one rumor that simply wouldn't die during all of the madness and rumors online. It all started with one of Trank's dogs who reportedly chewed on a few vitamins and had passed away the next day. Trank reportedly had the most emotional breakdown on the set after, and soon after in the rented home that Fox was renting for Trank during the shoot, over $100,000 of damage was done to the property. At the time it was blamed on Trank's dogs, but most likely dogs did not cause this much damage. It was most likely the crazy director himself. Once again, all the rumors of Trank nearly fighting the landlord which confronted over the damage also came up online. Fox reportedly had to pay for the damage, and the then president had to come down to the shoot and apologize to the landlord about the issue. Overall, just such a bizarre incident and just shows how chaotic the set of the film was. Also, other rumors show a director who was fighting over the studio over his version of the movie and just being overwhelmed in general, with even parts of him bunkering down in a black tent with a monitor and directing the actors even when to blink or to breathe even. Clearly, the whole experience was overwhelming to Trank, who was already just a pretty new director and just getting shoved up to a huge $100 million big budget film and was just not handling all of the pressure well, clearly. But also Fox was also to blame for the situation as well, as they kept meddling in his version of the movie and not promising what they already promised him in the past with creative control. To go back in time a little bit, prior to the start of filming back in 2014, Simon Kinberg introduced Trank to Lucasfilm, and when Trank was still the most promising director in Hollywood, was offered to direct a Boba Fett solo film. To be honest with you, Trank probably wasn't in the right mindset to accept such a task, but once again still accepted this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But as rumors of the production of the Fantastic Four started to come out and all the chaos was starting to unfold, even with Kinberg allegedly telling Kathleen Kennedy to not move forward with Trank allegedly, and things were not looking good for Trank directing the Boba Fett solo film. By the time of 2015's annual Star Wars celebration, Josh Trank was noticeably absent, claiming that he was cold during the weekend event. But later finding out Disney had told him to sit it out, and eventually the massive news hit the web. Trank dropped out of the Boba Fett solo film, which he claimed was more for personal reasons, but many sources and news claimed that he was really fired from the film, with Lucasfilm eventually planning on firing him anyway, and Trank deciding to leave before that actually happened. Even though not related to the Fantastic Four, it did not help the situation or the gathering storm of doom that was the 2015 Fantastic Four film on the horizon. After the 72-day shoot wrapped, somehow, Fox saw Trank's first cut of the movie, which caught many studio executives off guard. Trank from the beginning had pitched them this uncomfortable, body horror version of the Fantastic Four, and this is exactly what Fox got in his first cut of the movie. Fox complained that it was not marketable and they were horrified by the cut, and it would also make people feel uncomfortable. But according to Trank, that was the goal all along. Trank wanted to make a film from the very beginning that'd be the most rebellious thing that he possibly could, to make something uncomfortable, to really deconstruct the characters, and allegedly that's what Trank did in his first cut of the movie, which Fox didn't like. Even worse, the film still did not have an ending allegedly, with much of the finale scrapped before filming began. Soon, massive reshoots were announced for the film, which reshoots by all means are not a bad thing usually. But with this film, with the sheer scale of reshoots that were announced and the amount of work that needed to be done was enormous compared to other movies. Fox was basically trying to fix a mess that they created themselves by overreacting and ordering massive reshoots, which in my opinion probably wasn't the greatest thing to do. Not only that, but Fox also had entirely cut Trank out of the reshoots, allegedly just knocking him out of his own movie, with rumors circulating that Simon Kinberg and Hutch Parker were basically ghost directing the reshoots for the most part. Fox generated new script pages by other writers which in some days were written on the same day that they were supposed to be filmed. They also attempted to cobble together a third act that they thought would have worked and really pleased audiences, which obviously didn't work. They tried to squeeze a more marketable tone into the movie that was already designed from the beginning not to be that family-friendly summer blockbuster. Like I said from the very beginning, it was announced as this dark, gritty, uncomfortable, David Cronenberg-inspired movie. Once again, Fox, trying to push a triangular toy into a square hole. Good job. During all of the madness to save the film, Trank tried to insert his voice back into the film by generating his own pages for the third act and reshoots, but they were dutifully ignored by executives. He did eventually confront the producers over Directors Guild's rights, and Fox complied, allowed him to recut his film into his own version, and also at the same time Fox would work on their cut. Fox hired editor Steven Rivkin, who had credits on the first Avatar and also the first Pirates movies, to help edit the film. Rivkin chose shots for almost every scene of the film, but sometimes he chose the bad and more lifeless takes of certain scenes. But at the end of the day, he became the de facto director. Trank tried his best to fight and have certain shots of his cut be put into the final film, but by January of 2015, Trank realized there was no path to hell. The studio had already planned their own version of the movie and allowed Rivkin to become once again the de facto director. They also poured millions into rewrites and reshoots to basically fit Rivkin's cut of the film. While all this was going on, in January of 2015, an Interstellar-style teaser trailer was finally released to the public, giving everyone their first glimpse at the film. It once again promoted a dark and realistic body horror version of the Fantastic Four, but also hinted at exploration and adventure lurking around the corner. Personally, I love this trailer, and it makes the film look way better than it has any right to be. And sadly, tons of footage of this trailer doesn't actually make it into the movie. Let's play a game. Take a shot when you see a scene in this trailer that's not in the movie. Let's go. Like, for example, you got shots of Ben here, or Johnny, which were hinting at more backstory for these characters. Planet Zero also has more of an orange glow to things, way different than the final film that we got. And the most notable scene that was cut from the final film was this conversation between Reed and Doom, which never actually happened. It's a pretty cool shot, and also that really cool shot at the end of the trailer as well, which was never in the movie. The trailer seemed to silence some of the critics, and also intrigued many of the audience a bit for the movie. It gave some nice positive direction for a film that was constantly having bad news and rumors surface online. It also influenced what Fox wanted to go for the film and direction. While all this was going down, Trank felt defeated during all of this mess. Commenting in the Polygon article, which, to be honest with you, he really can't say much because of NDAs, but here's what he basically said. You're standing there, and you're basically watching producers blocking out scenes, 5 minutes ahead when you get there, having editors hired by the studio design a sequence of shots that are going to construct whatever is going on, and what it is that they need. And then, because you know you're being nice, and they'll sort of be nice to you by saying, well, does that sound good? And you can say yes or no. By then, Trank was isolated, and Fox, the producers, and a de facto Rivkin had taken direct control over the film from Trank. The extensive reshoots are long and difficult for the cast and crew, with many of the actors already committed to other projects and that transformed their appearances in order to do them. Like most noticeably Kate Mara, who you can easily tell which scene was shot in the reshoots and also the original shoot, just by her awful wig. Transforming from scene to scene from a natural muddy blonde to an ugly bleach blonde wig that looks incredibly disgusting. Also, certain shots of Miles Teller are obviously green screened in at certain scenes, and also Dr. Doom's name was ADR'd into the film as most notable reshoot additions. Reshoots were still continuing trying to supposedly save the movie. If the issues could not be any worse, then the second trailer dropped out of all days on a Sunday. A weird day to debut any trailer. Once again, let's play that game where we look at shots that are not particularly in the movie. For example, you got this Ben baseball shot. Also, the orange glow is still in this trailer, which may have hinted at the green was a last minute addition. You also got this really cool thing shot, and also this sick shot of him punching Doom, which was never in the movie. The trailer seemed to be decent, but all the rumors and hints suggested a movie headed for collapse. It was also announced that the planned 3D conversion of the film to be completely scrapped, which Simon Kinberg at the time tried to downplay, but all the signs pointed to the fact that the funds are being transferred to finished visual effects and also reshoots for the film. Trank and the producers try to quell the rumors the best they can, putting out fires the best they possibly could, spinning stories left and right. Like Trank saying that all the rumors of the reshoot's troubles were not true at all, and he promised that the film would be a big, action-packed slugfest. Despite the fact that Trank at this point had no control of the film that he was actually had the title attached to. It seemed like the motivation this time around was just try not to lose his job. And by July, a new trailer was released which hinted at a more action-filled spectacle. And like before, let's once again do the shot game. Some of the shots of the previous trailers are here, but also this epic shot of the Thing dropping out of a plane and attacking some Chechen rebels was not in the film. Fox even around this time hinted at the Fantastic Four crossover film to gather up excitement for it, even doing a cast photo of some of their X-Men cast, Fantastic Four cast, and Gambit? A little too quick, Fox. A little too quick. All the odd teasers, TV spots, and that weird-ass Thing commercial, like, why? were desperately trying to make the film appear to be a fun superhero film to the masses, but still did not stop all the rumor talk online, and also all the previous issues known about the film already. The cast did endless awkward interviews showing that they actually haven't even seen the movie and really just did not really understand what they're even making. The way certain questions were asked were hinted that the film was very difficult to work on, and most of them just didn't understand what was going on.
You're an actress. Promote our film.
Hi guys, how are you doing today?
Great.
Having fun in Atlanta so far?
Loving it.
Great time.
So let's talk about, I saw this movie yesterday, I absolutely loved it, and I mean...
The feeling of bracing for a disaster that you know is going to happen was all around the air. Fox put embargoes on all the reviews of the film until the day before release. A sure tell sign that the studio knew they were hiding the film because they knew how much of a disaster and a dud the film was. It's kind of like the breeze before a storm that would soon turn completely south. On August 4th, the film premiered in New York and eventually released on August 7th to horrible and scathing reviews everywhere. Kind of like that feeling of a storm slamming into your house, full of force, wind, and destruction. Many critics of the film described it as boring, dull, lifeless, spotty effects, and one of the most out-of-place third acts ever made, and also one of the worst villains ever to appear in a comic book movie with totally, completely, and unrealistic motivations. Everything people feared about this film seemed to come true, and even more so, and then eventually came that infamous tweet from Josh Trank. On August 6th, as the reviews started to crash down, Trank tweeted, "A year ago I had a fantastic version of this, and it would have received great reviews. You'll probably never see it, that's reality though." This tweet came out at possibly the worst time, right before the opening weekend of a film, which is a usual sign if the movie will do good or not. Trank by posting this confirmed all the rumors, and also all of the trouble of the production, despite denying all of the issues leading up to the eventual release of the movie. He essentially threw Fox and all of his friends that he made in the industry under the bus. Trank quickly deleted the tweet, but sadly it didn't really make much difference. It was actually estimated that this tweet alone may have actually cost the film $10 million at the opening box office, which, if this film was already struggling before, this may as well put the nail in the coffin for Fan Forstick. Now, financially, the film bombed hard opening weekend, making a small $56 million, which for a superhero film at the time was extremely disappointing. And the next weekend was even worse, dropping a staggering 20%. The film would end its box office gross only making about $167.9 million, which technically did surpass its reported budget, but also does not include all of the marketing and also other huge expenses. In 2016, the film also won Razzies for the Worst Picture, Worst Director, and also Worst Remake of the Year. I guess not so fantastic after all. To put it simply straight, Fan Forstick was a massive bomb, critically and financially for Fox. Now finally for my opinion for the film. With all the backstory finally explained, we can actually get into the meat itself. Fan Forstick, and yes I said Fan Forstick, as this was the title Fox decided to market the film as, even though it's called Fantastic Four. Also, I generally think it's pretty funny that the film was marketed as Fan Forstick, like Fox was embarrassed to call it Fantastic Four, so they gotta make it slick and edgy, but in the process made it look dumb. Fan Forstick is truly a bizarre movie. It feels like an aftermath of a war between a studio and a director, a Frankenstein in movie form. With so many fingers in the pie trying to fix it, it ended up just becoming such a bizarre and confusing mess. But I guess like that infamous tweet, that's reality though. So finally let's examine this film, what it does well, and of course, what it doesn't do so well. So first, with every film, despite how bad it is, there's always pros, and this film actually does have a lot of elements that work. So first, let's get into the pros. Like mentioned, despite the take that Trank was going for here, and also his lack of interest in the property in question, I do like the body horror take on the Fantastic Four. It could have worked if there was a good and compelling story, but obviously there wasn't really one, so it was lacking in this department. I do like how the film takes its time setting up the characters, and also explaining the teleporter a bit is a nice touch to the film at least. All of the cast themselves are also genuinely great actors. I think Michael B. Jordan could have been a great Human Torch, but they really just aren't really allowed to perform, or really just give any life-filled experiences full of excitement and just emotion. Other positives, I do like the fact that they also use the Ultimate Comics as kind of an inspiration, and also similar to the comics, the film also tries to give some reason for the characters' powers. Like how Ben gets hit by rocks, Johnny gets hit by fire, and Reed and Sue, I don't know exactly. I guess they at least gave half of them explanations, and I guess Victor got his power from that goo. I don't know. Also, I think the Thing has a great design in the film. His CGI is kind of inconsistent, and also, where are his pants? But for the most part, I generally think he looks great. The body horror scenes for the film, in my opinion, are just the best part of the movie. With the heroes learning that their bodies have been changed beyond belief, and seeing their reactions really makes for a great and interesting part of the movie. Kind of a shame that we don't really get to explore it for the rest of the film, I guess, with that awful 1-year time jump, but overall still was great and worth mentioning. What else? I guess some of the action sequences are good, I guess, and also that Doom part where he explodes a person's head is kinda cool, I guess. Also, some of the character scenes are decent, but overall, that is the pros that honestly I can think of about this movie. Now let's get into the long list of negatives. Now let's get into the cons, which are obviously massive. So let's get into it. First, let's get into the massive time jumps, which are really bizarre in the movie. The whole 1-year time jump after Reed escapes the facility and skips honestly all of the most important moments of the character's development is pretty stupid. You just now have the team learning to use their powers, and also examining all the horrors that come with that, actually exploring the body horror aspect that was pitched by Trank. But for some reason the film skips ahead a year, skipping all of the development and also all of the characters and potential development that would have came alongside with that. By this point we already see that the characters have mastered the powers, and just overall was a pretty stupid decision. Number 2. Lack of real depth. This movie shows a real lack of depth of any of the characters' events. None of the characters feel fleshed out at all, and also all of the arcs don't really have any type of huge and interesting payoff, like the 4 main characters. Sue, for example, understands patterns and thinks all people are formulaic until Reed comes along and surprises her, and that's all the film really does with that concept. There's never really a resolution or anything where maybe she finds out that not everyone is formulaic and just maybe learns to stop judging life by formulas, but nope, nothing happens with that. Or that Ben who hates Reed for abandoning him and thinks he owes him a cure like in the 2005 film, or Johnny who wants to help the military but his father not wanting to join them. And then after the big battle magically just changes his mind. And also we have the biggest question of them all, Victor aka Dr. Doom. My god, this villain is so stupid and just dumb. His motivations and arcs are so bizarre. No doubt probably completely butchered in the rewrites and reshoots that this film had to go through. Victor starts out in the film telling Franklin he doesn't want to work with him or his employers, until he finds out Sue is there, and well, is that his motivation? Sue? I guess you can say that, but he doesn't really make a move on her. And he also seems jealous of Reed for completing something that he started. So jealousy, is that the motivation here? Okay, I guess it's a decent way to start. But then when he returns from Planet Zero, the negative zone, which I don't know why it's not just called the negative zone. That's a Fantastic Four thing. He returns all changed and deformed in appearance, with his environment suit, yes, not environmental suit for some reason in this movie, fused to his body, and also the green goo from Planet Zero infused to his body as well. I do like how he gets the ultimate inspiration from this, with Doom having his metal skin, but also a lot of this design is just so strange. Some of it is honestly cool, but overall it kinda looks bad, and yeah, some of those memes are also deserved. But when he does come back, for some reason he wants to destroy the Earth and convert Earth's energy into energy for his planet, Planet Zero, with I guess a loose motivation that he's afraid humans will exploit his planet. But then again, why does he care for the planet? What is his offer that he wants to protect so bad? And why does he want to attack Sue and all of his friends that he protected earlier? Why does he do anything in this movie at the end? Overall, Doom makes for one of the worst villains in a Marvel movie. I'm sure that it was a product of reshoots and also many of the stupid decisions made behind the scenes, but still it made for one of the most incoherent and unbelievable villains ever. And that's why overall most of the characters lack that real depth or interesting arcs. Number 3, where's my third act? This movie really only has 2 acts, and it's missing the climax and also a proper third act. Now, some people in the comments may be saying, well, wait, that big battle and yeah, there's an ending, so yeah, there would be a third act, right? Well, nope, there's only 2 acts. There's an Act 1 that has all the teleporter stuff and the inciting incident, which is the accident, and then we have Act 2, which is the big massive time jump and the aftermath of all that for the characters. And then they find Reed, and then Doom randomly shows up, and then big random battle, and then ending. There's just not really any building of stakes here, or anything that builds to a proper third act. Everything just randomly happens really out of nowhere. It's like someone switched to a different cut of the film. From the time Doom shows up, it becomes a disfigured version of the film that Fox wanted, but at the end makes up for a super awkward version. The fight on the planet is fine, I guess, but then again, if Doom can just walk down a hallway and blow up a person's mind, I'm sure he could have done it to at least 3 of the 4. And also, why is he not? I don't know. I don't know why he doesn't do it. The fight is fine, but the way Reed talks to his former friends feels so cheesy and awkward and just extremely forced. Like, yeah, he's the leader of the team now because, you know, Fantastic Four. Despite literally before, Ben hating him still, Sue mad at him for leaving, and also Johnny mad at his father and Sue. They're not a team despite the film trying to make you believe so. Nothing feels built up or earned to this point. Even Ben says the thing that the Thing always says in the comics, right? The clobbering time. Despite it was a phrase from his older brother who used to slap younger Ben.
It's clobbering time!
Hey, clobbering time. Yikes!
The film also suffers from a huge lack of action, with obvious scenes of action being cut as seen in the trailers and also earlier drafts. Like mentioned, the battle is pretty mid still, and overall the whole end of the movie is a bad and feels like from a different movie. Even that ending when the Four return and just literally force the military to give them a research base. Yep, our heroes, folks. And then that ending. Oh god.
Say that again?
It's fantastic.
Yes, it is. Guys, I got it. Ready? Yeah.
I really don't want to talk about it, but Jesus, that might be one of the worst endings I've ever seen in a superhero movie. So yeah, the third act overall was horrible. In retrospect, that was 2015's Fantastic. It remains a reminder of the challenges faced by filmmakers who, when trying to reinvent classic superhero tales, and also serves as a lesson in the importance of striking the right balance between innovation and respect for the source material. So yeah, an extremely bizarre and awful film still. After the release of the film, despite the massive negative performance, Fox still initially had plans to move forward with a sequel, even with Simon Kinberg initially working on the project. And still, the ultimate strategic goal of Fantastic was still completed. It allowed Fox to hold onto the rights a few more years from their massive competitor, even though by then point in the contract they would have to begin production of another film by 2022 if they wanted to keep the rights to the Fantastic Four. Even Tommy Wiseau at the time expressed interest in directing the sequel, which I'm sure his Fantastic Four would have been literally amazing.
Everybody betrayed me. I fed up with this world.
But by November of 2015, the Fantastic Four 2 was wiped away from the release schedule of 2017, affecting killing the sequel that honestly nobody wanted. And as we all would eventually know, in December of 2017, Disney announced that they would acquire 20th Century Fox. This included all of the assets and characters they had the rights to, which effectively returned Marvel's first family back to Marvel Studios. The merger was complete by 2019, and Marvel announced that they would make a Fantastic Four reboot set in the MCU to be released in 2025, effectively making it the first film to be released in Phase 6 to the MCU. So with all the basic aftermath said, what happened to all the players involved with Fantastic? Well, first, Josh Trank. After the release of the film, he would spiral into a deep depression, divorcing his wife in 2016 and wandering around really not knowing what to do for himself anymore. Effectively having killed his career with the film and also being put in that metaphorical term, director's jail. But as the need of income started to become a reality and trying to find purpose, he started to work on a new film about a gangster, Al Capone, one of Trank's dreams about making a film about. He was able to secure Tom Hardy for the role, and it was really his star power that was really able to get the movie made, not really Trank's to be honest. Despite multiple failed attempts to get filming started, with even one stint in 2017 where Trank and his assistant John coming to Savannah to start filming, only to find out that Hardy had to work on Venom and bail out. Eventually though, filming eventually started and was completed, and despite many issues with getting the film released and funded, Josh Trank's Capone was released in 2020, signaling to some that Trank was not done yet. Overall, for my quick thoughts on the film, I thought it was pretty solid, way more consistent than the 2015 film, and Hardy giving a great performance as Al Capone. But overall, not an amazing film, but still pretty solid. Now for the further aftermath and for the rest of the players involved. The main cast themselves weren't too hurt by the movie in terms of their careers, with Miles Teller landing many roles in movies. Though Teller will always be my favorite just because he played that random dude in Project X.
Guys, let's start making some drinks, bro. Let's get crazy in this.
Kate Mara also went on to have a pretty decent career, and Jamie Bell would also have a pretty good career as well, landing a few good shows and movies as well. And Michael B. Jordan doing amazing with his Creed movies and also other projects as well. For the producers, Matthew Vaughn is still making a lot of great movies, and The Kingsman is also just great, by the way, and Arch Parker is, I'm sure, doing his thing. Simon Kinberg would take a backseat to things after making the last awful X-Men movie, X-Men Dark Phoenix, which, Jesus. Also, some additional details about the fallout surrounding the movie also started to come out. It was confirmed that the Thing drop scene was actually cut due to budgeting, and like mentioned before, it was also part of that 20 to 30 million was cut before cameras started rolling. Also, other details came to light as well, like how the original third act involved the Fantastic car at some point, as we can see in the behind the scenes videos. Also, other details of Trank's behavior becoming more erratic as he was trying to save his version of the movie started to come out. Fox basically gave a director who was not really ready for a project of this scale and just did everything they possibly could to hinder his efforts, discredit him every chance that they could. I wonder why a lot of directors don't really like working with you, Fox. And now to finally set some rumors straight, let's talk about that infamous Trank cut. Now, like the Snyder cut, there was a really cut of that movie that was finished and completed, and now eventually released to the public. In the case of the Fantastic Four though, there was maybe a lost Trank cut at some point, even according to Toby Kehl, which after the film release he stated he didn't really play Doom in the suit, but also Trank did cut a great film that we would never see. Trank even claimed as much in that infamous tweet, or did he? As far as we know, Trank did try to make his cut of the movie, but was never actually to completely finish it due to the fact that his original planned third act and ideas were scrapped in favor of the reshoots. Even Trank himself admitted that the Trank cut of his movie didn't really truly exist, at least in its entirety. There might be a version that's edited in a way that we actually might get to see what he would have preferred, but like I said, his original vision never actually got to be filmed and came to life. Overall, in my opinion, I'm sure it would have made for a much more consistent and better version of the film, but at the end of the day, we will truly never know. And I guess like Josh Trank's infamous tweet, that's reality though. Whew. Well, this was a video. Overall, that was the long journey and mess that was Fan 4 Stick, covering the many production issues the movie faced, its journey to the big screen, the film himself, and of course its tragic aftermath. I think that the ultimate lesson here is that there's a fine line between straying off and doing your own thing to being faithful to the source material. And then also in terms of making a movie when the studios step in and just letting the director do his job, and also just making a movie. I think for the future, there should just be more careful decisions made, and just more of an understanding between the director and the studio involved. And sometimes when you're so far along, it's honestly best if Fox just probably should have let Trank do his own thing. And overall, I'm sure the film would have just gotten better reviews for that, but that just didn't happen that way. And sadly, situations like this where studios kind of go in and tamper with things, like Batman v Superman, and of course most infamously Zack Snyder and his Justice League. Hopefully studios will learn to be more careful with their decisions, and also just kind of trust the directors that they hired involved. In my personal opinion, I think Fox just shouldn't have hired Trank to begin with, or at least trusted him so much to make his version of the Fantastic Four possible. And as much of a burning wreck that this film actually was, there are still many things about this film that fascinated me, and will continue to do so. But as I said before, all those elements just really fascinate me, and they're really just elements. If only all these elements came together to make for a much more, pun intended, fantastic movie. Overall though, that was my review and documentary of the Fantastic Four film from 2015. A story of a director's journey into the unknown only to come back scarred, transformed, and affecting others around them, just like the four themselves. A movie that is extremely interesting and fascinating, but at the same time so horribly flawed. Something that's always intrigued me. And hopefully Marvel will do right for the Fantastic Four and make a great movie and prove everyone wrong that says it's impossible to adapt this cursed property. Overall, thanks for watching this massive and long video. This video has actually been a passion project of mine for some time. It required a lot of research and a lot of effort to be put into it, but overall I'm really glad of how it turned out, and hopefully y'all enjoyed it as well. So once again, like always, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all later. Peace.